To God be the glory.
Welcome back to our study. We're in the book of Genesis, and we're in chapter 38. And as we get into chapter 38, we're going to see in our outline, we're at the event of Judah and Tamar. Now, this is kind of an interesting side story that takes place, but I think it's there clearly by inspiration, and of course, clearly for a purpose. The section shows how Jacob's sons were coming under the influence of the Canaanites around them. You know, with their intermarriages, it would not have been long until the descendants would have been absorbed into the larger group. And so from this, it's easy to see why God would send them into Egyptian captivity, where there they were looked unfavorably on all foreigners, especially shepherds, and that would force them to remain distinct and a separate people. And so this side story is going to help us to understand the problems that were created with these intermarriages. So let's look at chapter 38, verses 1 through 5. And it says, "And it came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he married her and went in to her." So there's the intermarriages. "So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and called his name Oned. And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. He was at Chezib when she bore him." Now notice this. "Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar." Now, Tamar is going to figure in greatly in these events. "But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. And Judah said to Onan, 'Go into your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother.'" Now, because of his evil wickedness, God allows him to die. And then Judah says, okay, to the younger brother, you need to go in to your brother's wife and raise up children for your brother. And this seemed to have been the custom of that time. And to make sure that the wife would be taken care of, she would have children that could care for her in her old age. And so this seemed to be the practice of the time. But notice what happens. Verse 9. "But Onan knew that the heir would not be his. And it came to pass that when he went into his brother's wife, that he emitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother." And so his thinking is, well, yeah, if we have children, that doesn't do me any good. That doesn't help my descendants, my inheritance. And so I don't want to split this with my brother who's passed away. Verse 10, "And the thing which he did displeased the Lord. Therefore he killed him also." And so he also is allowed to die because of his wickedness and because of his evil. Now notice verse 11. "Then Judah said to Tamar his daughter-in-law, 'Remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown.' For he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house." Being married into the family now, the father, Judah, he's responsible to take care of her. And so he says, well, the youngest son, he's too young, Shelah. He's too young at this point. You just come and live in my house. And then when he's older, and then he will be given to you in the sense that he can raise up descendants, raise up children for you. And so that is the plan at this point. But notice that it changes. And Judah decides not to do that. Verse 12. "Now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted, and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, 'Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep.' So she took off her widow's garments, and covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and set in an open place which was on the way to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. So now it's at the point where Shelah has already grown up now. Judah should have given him to her to have children by her so that she could be taken care of, but he did not. Now, we don't know why he did not. Maybe he thought that she was bad luck. He's already lost 2 sons that had been with her, and so he's thinking, well, I don't want to lose Shelah as well. Or perhaps he was just afraid, and so decided not to honor that commitment that he gave to her. Verse 15, when Judah saw her, he thought that she was a harlot because she had covered her face. And then he turned to her by the way and said, please let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, what will you give me that you may come in to me? Now, again, we're seeing that evil influence of the Canaanites and those intermarriages, things that were taking place because of that. Well, look how evil these events have grown now, and things are taking place that should not be. And so she says, well, what are you going to give me if you're going to come into me? Verse 17, and he said, I will send a young goat from the flock. So she said, will you give me a pledge till you send it? So he's saying in the future he's going to send her a young goat. That seemed to be the agreed upon payment at this time. But he doesn't have the young goat with him. So she says, okay, well, how can I be assured that you're going to send me this young goat? What will you give me as a pledge that you're going to keep that? Verse 18, then he said, what pledge shall I give you? And she said, your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand. Then he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. And so he did give her those things, so as a pledge that he would keep his promise and send her this goat. Verse 19, so she arose and went away and lay aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adullamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. And then he asked the men of that place, saying, where is the harlot who was openly by the roadside? And they said, there was no harlot in this place. And so he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. Also the men of the place said, there was no harlot in this place. Then Judah said, well, let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed, for I sent this young goat, and you have not found her. So Judah's thinking, well, okay, she can just keep those pledges, those things that I gave her, and in that way, I don't want to stir things up and make this even worse than it is. The word gets out that here I'm looking for a harlot to make payment to her for what has taken place. And so he says, well, she can just keep those things and we'll just hopefully let the information die down and nobody will know what has taken place. Well, he's soon going to find out that everyone is going to know the evil that he has done. Verse 24, and it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. And so he doesn't know who she was with, and he doesn't understand everything. He's thinking, oh, that she has just been with someone, and she has done this, and she has not kept herself as she should have. And so she should be punished. Verse 25, when she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, please determine whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. So Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah my son, and he never knew her again. And so then he has been found out. He realizes what has happened, and the guilt is truly his for what he has done. He did not keep his promise to her. Was what she did right? No. She did what she thought she had to do so that she could have children and have some kind of support in the future. But it was terrible. The whole event and everything around it was terrible, terrible, wicked evilness that takes place. Well, that's what's happened. And now they are intermarrying with those idolatrous people, and we see that that influence is having its effect. Verse 27, Now it came to pass at the time for giving birth, that behold, twins were in her womb. And so it was, when she was giving birth, that the one put out his hand. And the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, This one came out first. Then it happened, as he drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly. And she said, How did you break through? This breach be upon you. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. And so there we see the event concerning that and the wickedness that is beginning to influence this family because of those intermarriages. Now we get back to the main event concerning Joseph. And we're going to find out about Joseph. Remember the dreams he had and told his brothers, told his father about those dreams that they would eventually bow down and serve him. Well, how is that going to happen? What are the events that are going to lead up to that? Well, the text is going to tell us. Here we find Joseph in a terrible situation. Remember, he was thrown into the pit by his brothers, but then lifted up and sold to the Midianites. And the Midianites, of course, took him and sold him off to Potiphar. Well, let's see what happens to him as he finds himself in that situation as a slave. What we're going to see is that God is with him, and God is going to lift him up, even in this situation. So in our outline, you'll notice Joseph's promotion in Egypt. This is chapter 39 through 41. And chapter 39 is Joseph's imprisonment. And so let us notice that. Chapter 39, verse 1, Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph. Do you see that? Think about how significant that is. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him, and then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. Now, I think it's interesting that it is recognized that the Lord is with him, and is also recognized that the reason for his success is because the Lord is with him. And so Potiphar realizes that. Verse 5. So it was from that time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. All right, let's pause there at verse 6. He was so trusted by his master that Potiphar could put everything into his hands and know that it's going to be taken care of. The only thing he has to worry about is, okay, what am I going to have for dinner? That's his only concern. Okay, what am I going to have for dinner? Everything else is taken care of. All my business affairs are taken care of. I know that things are prospering, and so he has nothing to worry about. That is the trust that he has in his servant Joseph. Now, the last part of verse 6, notice this is kind of a preview to what's going to take place. It says, Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Well, let's notice the problems that occur. Verse 7, And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused, and he said to his master's wife, Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed her, did not listen to her, to lie with her, or to be with her. Now, Potiphar's wife wanted to have sexual relations with Joseph because he was so handsome. But notice this chart of Joseph's rejection and the defense that he makes. First, he could not betray his master's complete trust. Also, she is Potiphar's wife and is therefore withheld from him. And so she could not be considered as part of what belonged to him. No, she belonged to the master, and he would have no part of that. And also, any sin is a sin against Jehovah. But she enticed him. On every occasion that she had, she continued to entice him, but he continued to reject her. Now, notice what happens. Verse 11. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were inside, and so there's no witnesses near about, that she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. It's kind of interesting as a side note, the instances of his garments playing a key role, whether it's his tunic that his father gave him, that festive garment that made his brothers so jealous, or this garment that he had to actually run and just leave in her hands because he didn't want to deceive his master and do such a horrible thing as this. Verse 13. And so it was, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, Now, watch this lie. See, he has brought into us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And so at first it seems she is blaming her husband in this. I can't believe my husband has brought in this Hebrew who would do such a terrible thing, and that he came in, and that here it was Joseph's idea to come in and try to have sexual relations with her, and that she was the one that cried out with a loud voice to be rescued. Verse 15, And it happened when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. So she kept his garment with her until his master came home. And so now she's telling this lie. She's got everything figured out, thinking, okay, I'll be able to convince the master of this terrible thing that Joseph has done, and then I can get him into trouble for what has happened. Verse 17. So then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, and so here she's talking to the master, Potiphar, The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to me to mock me. So it happened, as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. And so now she tells the lie to her master as well, and it seems that it's simply her word against his word. And so the lie is told to Potiphar. Who is he going to believe? And notice the language she uses once again, the Hebrew servant whom you brought to us. And so it's as if she's trying to put Potiphar into this guilt as well, saying, you did this, you brought him to us. And so she's trying to include everyone into the problem except for the one who it should be blamed on, and that's her and the things that she has done. Well, how is Potiphar going to react to such a thing as this? We know the trust that he has in Joseph and all the things that he has put in Joseph's care. So how will he respond to such a thing as this? Verse 19. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, Your servant did me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. And then Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. Now, I want you to notice concerning Potiphar's reaction. It says that his anger was aroused. Now, I don't know how much of that was directed towards Joseph, because, of course, if that was truly what had taken place, Potiphar could have killed Joseph for doing such a horrible thing. But perhaps he didn't really believe what he was being told, and that his anger was just with the situation, because now he knew that he was going to have to do something. And so he decides, well, I'll have to put Joseph into prison, and that will show that I have respect to my wife and respect for myself when this story is told to others. And if they think that is the truth of it, then I will have to do this. And so you see what a terrible situation he has been put in by the lies of his wife. And you can see how his feelings towards Joseph kind of withholds his hand, where he could have done much more to punish him, but he did not. And so he was there, put in prison. Verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Now we see that phrase twice in this section, that the Lord was with Joseph, and also here in verse 23, the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it to prosper. And so we see in all of this situation and all these terrible things that have happened to Joseph, God is with him. And so what an encouragement that must have been, that even going through these difficult, trying times, that God is with him, and he is being successful. In whatever situation he finds himself, he is being successful. And why is he successful? Because the Lord is with him, because the Lord is blessing him. And so once again, he is blessed, and even in the time of adversity and problems, God is with him. Now, in our outline, you'll see in this next section the interpretation of the prisoner's dreams by Joseph for the main thing that we see in chapter 40, that there are going to be dreams that are going to be told, and there's going to be someone who needs to interpret those dreams, and we're going to see Joseph's part in that. Now look at chapter 40, starting with verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their lord. And the king of Egypt and Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, and the chief butler and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. And so we're being told this preliminary information because of what's going to happen next. Verse 4, the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them so that they were in custody for a while. So during their time here, as they are confined to the prison, Joseph is watching over them. Verse 5, then the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, had a dream. Both of them, each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with its own interpretation. And notice this, verse 6. And Joseph came in to them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad. And so he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of his lord's house, saying, why do you look so sad today? And they said to him, we each have had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. So Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please. Now, the first thing we notice about this is Joseph's concern for them. That here are these men, they mean nothing to him really, but yet he's showing them compassion and concern. He notices that they are very sad because of this dream that each of them have had, and they don't have any way of knowing what it means. And so he cares about that. He has concern. And also, notice what he says the last part of verse 8, because this is key. It says, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please." Now, Joseph is not saying, "I am the all-powerful one. I will tell you what your dreams mean. Tell them to me so that I can tell you." No, he is giving credit to God. He says the interpretations belong to God. If you will tell them to me, and of course he is a servant of God and he's blessed by God, that perhaps in this way God will interpret the dreams and tell them the meaning of them. Verse 9. Then the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "Behold, in my dream a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded. Its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. And then Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." And so that was his dream, and here Joseph is able to tell him what it means. And Joseph said to him, verse 12, "This is the interpretation of it." And notice, of course, this is God telling him what it means. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Now within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former manner when you were his butler." And so the butler is going to be restored to his place and regain his position. But notice this, Joseph adds something. Verse 14, "But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews. Also I have done nothing here that they should put me in the dungeon." And so he's able to give God's interpretation to him of the dream, that he will be restored to his place. Now notice about the baker. Verse 16, "When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, I also was in my dream, and there were 3 white baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head." He's thinking perhaps that he's going to get a good interpretation as well. Verse 18, "So Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets are 3 days, and within 3 days Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you." Now, of course, that's not what he wanted to hear, and I'm sure the baker was devastated by this news, hoping that he would get good news, as did the butler, but he did not. Verse 20, "Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them, yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." And so just as Joseph had interpreted the dreams, it comes to pass. And remember the last thing that he had said to the cupbearer. He says, "Well, when you are restored to your position in 3 days, please remember me and my situation, that I am here in prison, not by any fault of my own. I have done nothing wrong, so please tell Pharaoh concerning me." But the last part here in verse 23, "Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." You think there would have been more appreciation for what Joseph had done for him, interpreting his dream, telling him of that good news that was going to take place. But no, he forgot about Joseph for a time. Now we're going to see that this is going to happen later, that he is going to tell Pharaoh about Joseph and his situation. So we're going to have to stop there, and we'll begin at chapter 41 next time and continue to see that, yes, God is with Joseph, and he is blessing him, and through all these things, God is going to raise him up. He's going to give him a position of power and prominence, and indeed, just as he said, eventually It would be his family that would come to Egypt and would bow down to him. So we'll stop there. And chapter 41, we'll begin our study next time. Thank you so much for your attention.